Issue 133. We start out in Casino Night Zone where Max Gamble is trying to sell Flicky's Island as a vacation spot for people, and they aren't too enthused even though Eggman's base on it was completely destroyed. Do they know about that? Oh, they don't, and they're convinced otherwise when Max tells them about it. And of course he wants to be paid in cash only. I guess he's an outlaw with no bank account? Wouldn't Eggman's base being destroyed immediately be something that the heroes would announce to the world as a morale booster? The vacationers go to Flicky's Island and decide to explore it while wondering where Max is since he said he'd be their tour guide. And the same woman who was suspicious before magically gets the feeling that she's being watched for the sake of clumsy foreshadowing. There sure are a lot of psychics in this comic. Predictably, they all get threatened by a robot, and back at her workshop in Emerald Hill, Techno warns Sonic that in her research on their old enemies, she's learned about Gamble's plan. It does make sense that she'd want to monitor them, and it's drawing the savvy Sonic to immediately assume Gamble's plan has a catch. Sonic gets on a tornado ride to the island with Tails, and the vacationers accidentally trigger the island's automatic defensive systems, which requires Tails to catch one of them when he falls into a trap. Sonic defeats the robot and insults the civilians for being stupid enough to buy a holiday from a villain. I guess he just takes civilians being in trouble for granted, and so it's hard for him to muster up sympathy for them when it's trouble they got themselves into. But still, it's unusual of a hero to insult someone they just saved for needing their help. He's lucky he can get away with that. Tails is happy the dangers are all over now, which is clumsy foreshadowing that immediately has a hidden laser show up that didn't already show up earlier for some reason. And Sonic calls Tails a pixel brain, insulting him for tempting fate. As if Tails has that much power over the universe. That would have happened regardless of what he said, and Sonic should know that. Sonic tells the others to head for the beach while he'll draw the laser fire, and after the civilians have gotten to safety, Sonic decides to disable all of the island's traps, with Tails strangely doubting his ability to be fast enough to do that. Of course, he does in just 1 second, being able to move at over 600 miles per hour and all. So why did Max Gamble do this? How could he have possibly had anything to gain from getting them all killed? News would spread about that, and so no one would buy a holiday from him again. Then after Max Gamble pushes money around in a wheelbarrow, because apparently that's all he was doing with it for the past hour, Sonic tells him that he owes the civilians behind him a refund. Why is he here? Why hasn't he spent his money on hookers or something? And he's disappointed that they all survived to tell the tale. Why? If he had thought to spend that money and wasn't holding it all in front of him at the time, maybe he would have gotten to keep it. This is so contrived. Though I'm sure Sonic still would have gotten him arrested. Gamble says that by law, he doesn't have to refund them, and then Sonic just runs away instead of doing anything to him, like getting to the nearest police station. This unsatisfying action by Sonic sends some wind at the dollar bills, letting all the civilians get their money back, and the story ends with Sonic taunting Gamble, even though he started to run away at super speed, saying he's out of here earlier. So you'd think he'd be miles away by now and not aware of what he did. In the next story, after a peaceful moment between people that I'm sure will go wrong quickly, we see a woman scream, throwing something through glass, and steal jewelry while telling the customers to help her. So I assumed that she was being controlled somehow while not injured from smashing glass right in front of her. Also, she must have thrown it at super strength because that's the weakest glass ever. Then all the customers start becoming criminals. And the disease spreads to the owner of the store as well. This is a little funny in how ridiculous it is, but imagine how bad it'd be if this was a global pandemic. That'd be the only way that an entire planet of evil beings would make sense, if they were forced into it. Amy and Techno hear cries for help in a burger bar as they're eating at a table together, and I chuckled at the civilians' lines, "Help! The bank's just been robbed! By the bank manager!" That sounds so silly. It's a huge threat, a terrible thing happening, but at the same time they managed to make it kind of funny. Techno pushes the bank manager down and he thanks her. Some more criminals thank the heroes for stopping them, but most of them get away because there's too many of them. Also, it's a good thing that the police on Mobius don't stupidly decide to punish the freedom fighters for vigilantism for trying to do their jobs for them, because that'd be really annoying if John replied to them. With Techno figuring out that none of them wanted to do the crimes, her scanner conveniently detects microchips with AI sewn into the fabric of their suits, so their suits are alive and forcing them to steal. We cut away to the unappealing sight of the Mobian civilians down to their, bathing suits, which is fortunately a little offset by the charming line by the cop, "I've never had to arrest suits before." I giggled a little at that. That made me smile a lot. The most unappealing looking civilian says that it's starting to rain now, and the large one says that their suits are short-circuiting from the rain because the people who made them for the evils didn't think to make them waterproof. Later, we see a civilian being forced to go with a wheelbarrow of money to a vengeful mad scientist who says hilariously, "The Mad Scientist Club laughed when I said I invented intelligent fabric." And continues with his ridiculously hammy villain boasting that he's an evil tailor named Alf. 2 people in this comic named Alf, and he'll become the richest villain in the world. And again, I can't stop smiling at how amusing this is. I think this might be one of my favorite stories in the whole comic so far. And favorite stories in general. And I could never pick one favorite story from Archie. This is how you do comedy right in Sonic. It's a huge threat of a plan, but it's also got hilarious silly dialogue that points out the absurdity of how silly the plan sounds. And it's good that it's silly. It's not breaking suspension of disbelief. Amy and Techno come out of the money holding Super Soakers, with Amy making an out-of-place pun that doesn't even make sense is cottoned onto, an idiom I'd never heard of before. The mad scientist Alf says, "Suits, destroy the heroes!" And I get the biggest smile again and start giggling a little from just imagining floating clothes and effectively trying to limply hit them with their sleeves. Of course, what he meant was the suits would force people to fight with their fists, which would be far more intimidating. Of course, Amy and Techno spray the suits, and the mad scientist actually explains why his plot failed. He made the material dry clean only, and he had suspected that would be a mistake, probably after it was too late. That was fortunate. The story ends with him behind bars, and Amy and the criminal making puns about suits. I mean, puns are always out of place in stories, no matter what, but it's easier for me to tolerate them in Fleetway because at least they're much more rare and we never have any... Well, actually, we do have stupid fourth wall-breaking moments because the characters make the puns while looking directly at the camera, often in the last panel, which is really stupid. It's like, it makes the characters look like they're just there to entertain stupid little kiddies. But most of the time, they don't do that, at least. I can sort of buy Amy making puns for humor because she's a dork, and she wants to troll people who don't like puns. But I can't buy a criminal behind bars making a pun at his own expense. In the next story, we see some civilians walking a line with a text box saying that it's Mobius Cup final day. Then we see a sports team manager insulting his team, saying that they've all become unhealthy, lazy slobs, and a fake Mobian is actually surprised that he can talk. Really? First off, who would hire a mute coach? Isn't talking part of their job? Does he write his speech down? And second, I assume from this that he's been replaced with an evil infiltrator robot, because he's apparently acting very out of character. Then he asks Sonic to join his team, and Sonic refuses because his skills wouldn't give the other team a sporting chance. Kinda weird of Fleetway Sonic to care. Any other Sonic, sure, that's why Sonic uses a car in racing games. Really, he shouldn't have even had the idea to ask Sonic, because it should be obvious that a hero like Sonic would know that he's cheating by using his speed and refuse, and he couldn't really hold back on his speed for long. After Sonic is accused of siding with the other sports team, Sonic calls football folk zonophobic, and I misread that as homophobic at first and had to do a double take. Surprisingly, the coach shoots Sonic with something that covers him in green light, and we cut to him in a cell with very tough metal bars. Then the coach uses the device to give his people Sonic speed and abilities. You'd think that would be noticed as strange immediately and they'd be disqualified, and he'd go to jail for stealing Sonic speed. It's not like he's hiring new players who no one's already familiar with the abilities of. The players immediately feel fast, because I guess part of having Sonic's abilities is instinctively having your brain know that you can use them. The players being so fast goes terribly wrong. They're not really used to such speed. And when Sonic shows up from the ground, he's asked how he escaped. Burrowing into the floor with a spin dash, of course. He runs in a circle around the coach to create a tornado around him, and for no reason, the players' skills wore off, and they lost the match horribly. It sure is lucky for Sonic that the device merely copied his abilities, instead of stealing them so he wouldn't be able to escape the cell, like I kind of assumed. The story ends with the villain being arrested. And the last story saves me trouble having to review it because it's just a worthless reprint of the story where Sonic first met the Sentinel, which wastes precious comic space. And I think they're going to keep doing reprints like this from now on. It's going to be like one reprint per issue. So when I get to a reprint, I'll act like it never existed. That's easier on my hands. So good. This issue is by Lou Stringer. The first story is about Max Gamble tricking some civilians into trying to vacation at the island where Eggman's base used to be. I don't blame them, honestly. It looks like a nice spot for a vacation. And how are they supposed to know that Sonic hadn't disabled its traps yet? And it turns out Gamble intentionally led them into those traps so that they wouldn't live to warn people about them and make him not make money off sending people to the island again. Couldn't he tell people to go to literally any other island instead? At least his evil plot had a good result, as Sonic might have never thought to disable the traps if he hadn't been forced to go there. And it makes sense that Techno would start compiling a database on the activities of her enemies so she'd know when they'd be having evil plans. But Max Gamble's plan makes no sense. He should have known that people would notice the disappearance of the people and track it down to him. Like, shouldn't he go to jail? Like, shouldn't he have a parole officer constantly? Why does he constantly get out of jail? Why is he free all the time? That doesn't make any sense. At least with Eggman, he was the ruler of the world. And then he had inventions so he could escape easily. This guy's worse than Renfield. I mean, it's not like he has a rich father and so he keeps bailing him out of jail or something. And you'd think that he would get sick of him. The second story, I might feel bad about potentially praising it too much and being annoying, but when I first read this at least, this was honestly my favorite story. Just the idea of people's clothes moving by themselves and forcing them all to steal money from mad scientists is so silly and ridiculous that it makes me smile and laugh just hearing about it, let alone seeing it. And seeing the amusing melodramatic dialogue that resulted from it. And it's not even too silly for the Sonic series, because this is a sci-fi fantasy series, anything's possible. At the same time, the village was a huge threat in what he was doing, because imagine if everyone in the world had suits like that. It'd be pandemonium. Everyone would be forced to be a criminal, even the police. So this is how you do comedy in Sonic right. Make the plot of the villain threatening, and make sense, because of course he'd want money, but also make it silly, so that it gives the story tons of charm and amusingness to go hand in hand with it. It's like, Boom just mentions Evil Ham. It doesn't have the Evil Ham become radioactive and destroy the world, potentially. I'll stop myself now because I'll just start repeating myself about what makes the story so great. I think after I reread it for the review, I'd say that the second story with Simpson the Cat in it, as in the second story in the first story arc, that is the best one because I was laughing all the way through the review just talking about it. I didn't laugh as much with this story, but bottom line is this is how you do comedy right in Sonic, minus the puns at the end. And I wish every story in a Sonic comic could be like this, because this just proves that Sonic can do a story fantastically well. Even if I'm sure it was only so good by complete blind luck accident. And the third story was about a sports manager with no common sense stealing Sonic's powers to give to his sports players. His plan sucked right from the get-go because he should have known that'd be cheating and get noticed and get his players disqualified from the match, but instead we don't hear any mention of those consequences, and the match isn't declared illegitimate. Second, when did he and where did he get that kind of device? The black market run by Eggman's fan club? And third, logically, the players all lose because they aren't used to thinking with Sonic speed, which is weird since their brains immediately have to know they're fast but don't give them the reaction times to compensate, which should go hand in hand. Is the device faulty? Somehow they lose, and even more somehow, their abilities were only temporary, and Sonic kept his powers all along instead of them being stolen from him. That might sound harsh, but this story sucked. I kind of like the premise of it. Of course Sonic's speed could be seen as useful in sports, but the manager shouldn't have thought he'd even get away with it and try it. The whole thing felt contrived as a result.